Welcome to Bulletproof Veteran Podcast. Thank you for your service.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Bulletproof Veteran Podcast. We're going to have a lot of fun today. I have two authors on the show, and we're going to focus on military thrillers. Awesome stuff. I know everybody loves this type of writing, and I was so excited to have you guys on to talk about it. We have the two authors that are the founders of the Tier 1 series. It's a best-selling international bestseller, and they're going even further, and they've now started almost their whole universe where now we have offshoot characters going in, and they have a book coming out called Sons of Valor. All right. And that's what we're here for. We're here to talk a little bit about this book, their process, everything that goes into writing fiction and just writing in general. So I want to thank, we have Brian Andrews and Jeffrey Wilson on, and thank you so much, guys.
We're glad to be here. You say you have two authors. We'll just put this out up front. We feel like the two of us combined, we're almost like as good as one author. So it takes,
but you have to know that. So you gotta compliment each other, you know?
Yes. Everything with us is a team lift. So, you know.
That's good. So you fit in right with those cardboard boxes that Amazon drops off where it says team lift right on the side. You guys that's you.
We put that on the back of our books.
All right. Very, very good. Well, as we usually do on the show, we like to start off and talk a little bit about the people that we have on, you know, just a little bit about your backgrounds. You're both Navy veterans. You have very interesting backgrounds, both of you. So, Jeff, why don't you start off?
Sure. So my background is a little hard to go through because my mom says I can't keep a job. So I've done a lot of different things. I'm a surgeon by education, but I came to that late. So my very brief overview of my evolution is I started out in aviation. I was going to be a Navy pilot, got in a motorcycle accident. That didn't work out. So I took those skills and I flew civilian for a while and didn't find that as satisfying. So I transferred that into another government agency and wound up working for a federal agency doing some stuff in a life that was a little bit violent. And so that led me to say, gosh, maybe I'm not enjoying this. I'm going to go to med school. So I went to med school, was finishing up my training in vascular surgery when the jackasses crashed the planes into the towers in the Pentagon. And I don't know, I was a naval reservist at the time, having served already. And I guess it just sort of pissed me off like it did so many other people. And so I went to my detailer and I said, I want to go back on active duty. And was able to work that out, deployed with the Marines. And while I was downrange with the Marines as a FRIS team surgeon, I ran into some people from my past who were doing some other weird things. And a series of introductions, I wound up being recruited to work with a SEAL team out of the East Coast, providing combat surgery support for some darker operations where they wanted to have very small footprints. So I did that for a while, and then that was very satisfying. I really made some close friends and people I consider brothers. Unfortunately, we lost a lot of them in 2011 during Extortion 17, some people that I was close to. And then I worked for a joint interagency task force for a time, and now I write books. So, you know, just pretty much the average story.
Yeah, no, because you generally, when you become the vascular surgeon, you table that. You don't.
Yeah.
You don't actually do that. You throw that in the background.
And even that was weird because, you know, when I went to medical school, I was 30, which isn't that old, but, you know, all these other kids were like 22, 23 years old. I was already the old man because I had done other things. I'd been a firefighter and I'd been a pilot and worked for the government. And so my whole life I was sort of like being that weird out of guy. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. But I would have to imagine that now, as an author, you kind of more fit in because I think authors generally fit that mold a little bit where they got a lot going on. They kind of have so much to pull from inspiration wise. So you probably meet a lot of guys like you.
Yeah, I think the good ones do. And we'll let Brian comment on that as well when he tells his story, which is really interesting. But I think that if you look at the top 10 thriller writers or romance writers or mystery writers, whichever genre you like, you'll find that 9 out of 10 of them do not have any education in creative writing. Right. They just have really rich lives. They've just done a lot of things. They're all avid readers. they enjoy writing and they've got life experience to deal from. So like you said.
Yeah, very cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. Brian, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I have to tease Jeff too, because when we first started writing together and I saw his bio, I said, dude, you got to, you gotta change that bio. It just sounds ridiculous. He said, but I did all those things.
Nobody's going to believe you.
No one will believe you. Yeah, no, it's very hard to follow Jeff in the bio, the bio introductions. He's done some really cool things, and that's one of the great things about working with Jeff too, is he does bring a whole skill set that I don't have, and a whole very rich background of experiences that I don't have. You know, I was a submarine officer, so I spent my military service sneaking around underwater.
Mm-hmm.
You know, our nicknames are the squids because we sort of are these bottom feeders that hang out, you know, at the bottom. Nobody sees us. But yeah, so that was my military service. I was a nuclear submarine officer. I was on a fast attack nuclear submarine, and that was a very, very unusual and like fantastic experience. You know, at 22 years old, I'm in charge of a $6.5 billion machine, you know, probably one of the most complicated machines ever built by man, because it's nuclear powered, it's completely self-sustaining, it drives around in the dark, you can't see where you're going, and somehow you still complete these really, really incredible missions. So like Jeff, I made a lot of friendships, really felt like I was part of a fantastic community and a brotherhood, and I loved my military service.
Yeah.
And when it was time to have a family and move on and try some other things, I was fortunate enough. I applied for the Park Fellowship program at Cornell, which is a leadership fellow program. And, you know, 2 years of leadership, talking about servant leadership and entrepreneurship. And you know, from there, I went into the civilian world and tried to make, you know, my mark there. And I think it'll be fun to talk about some of those experiences too, because one of the things that Jeff and I find, you know, what's the word? Motivating, but also, you know, tugs on the heartstrings, is how does a veteran, you know, find their way? When you leave the military, when you're in the military, you have this great community, this network, this brotherhood. And then when you leave and you're separated, and suddenly you have these big ambitions and ideas, but you've left that whole network behind. And how do you find your path? And how do you not just feel like you're left flapping in the wind? And so we can talk a little bit about that on the show, because we might have some tips on that.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about it a lot, and it comes up with almost everybody that I have that is, you know, ex-military, who's a veteran on the show, is that transition period. And everybody kind of has their own type of a transition story about when they got out, how they decided to do what they're doing. An echoing type of theme is this time of being a little lost. Yeah. Even for people that didn't deal with any type of, mental issues or anything like that. It's just, I know for myself, I came home and I'm standing around going, okay, I'm working at a vineyard out on the east end of Long Island, and I'm a boat mechanic. It's not the same. And you didn't have the same amount of, you weren't used to like getting out of work and having a bunch of guys around, and it's payday and you're going to the bar and you're hanging out and you're telling each other the same stories, or it's Christmas and you're the only family you got right now because you're overseas and you're doing Christmas together and everybody's telling stupid stories and ragging on each other. You're kind of alone for a lot of guys when they get out. So I would love to hear actually from both of you, because you were both in kind of very high speed career fields. Did you guys go through that? Did you have that like low when you first got out?
I mean, I think everybody goes through that to some extent. I mean, I think anyone that says they didn't probably just missed it, but it happened. Because there's things that simply just don't translate directly from military to civilian service. And one of them is, you sort of hinted at, that, like you listed some really good, honest, hardworking jobs that you definitely feel proud about, right? But it's not the same as saving the world, is it? And so there's that sense of higher purpose Yeah, when you're a boat mechanic, you want to make sure you do the best job. You have pride in your work. You want the final product to be perfect, that guy to appreciate your craft, but you don't feel that same sense of mission before self, country before self, this higher calling to leave the world a little better. I experienced that even the first time when I transitioned out of active duty military after my motorcycle accident. I went and flew jets for a coal company. And the reason I went back and went and found another way to serve in government service was I loved the job. The jet was awesome. The job was fun. The guys were great. Even the people we worked for, it was a corporate job, but the guys were just good old boys, and we all had a great time. But at the end of the day, making sure those guys got to their business meeting on a golf course in South Carolina on time,
not the same.
Right. It just wasn't the same. Exactly. Yeah. And so that's one element I think that you lose, is that high sense of purpose. But the other thing that you were alluding to is the camaraderie. It's the brotherhood. There's a brotherhood that's forged in sacrifice. It's forged in shared experience, shared service. And it's hard to duplicate in the civilian world. And I'm not just saying because, I'm not saying the civilian people can't have that. There's certainly plenty of places where you do, but it's just different. You go to the civilian world expecting your coworkers to have a certain code like you had in the military, and you just find it's not there. Brian, you had that a little bit in the business world, right?
Yeah, I think when you're active duty, whether you're part of a squadron or a ship or a unit, you have a rank, you have a rating, and you have a charter. That unit, that squadron, that ship, it has a mission. And, that gives you this sense of direction. We talk about purpose, but you also sort of know where you fit in the machine, your place, and you have, you show up for work and you have this daily agenda, and Jeff and I like to talk about, when you're in the military and you're on a boat, everybody's rowing the same direction. And that is comforting. And you get out and you separate, you become a civilian, and suddenly you lose that structure. All the things that you've become reliant on professionally are gone in the civilian world. So how do you recapture that sense of place and sense of purpose and direction? It's a real challenge. And, I think for us, our story represents the solution. I mean, and it's not going to work for everybody. You're going to have to find your own way. But what we did is, hey, Jason, we were talking about this. Writing is an individual business. It can be a little lonely. And we were both writing books individually. And we realized that we were missing that sense of teamwork and camaraderie and collaboration. So Jeff and I met at a writing conference, and, finally, we're there with a bunch of writers. We're all great people, but here's a guy who has everything in common with me, same stage in his life, same experiences. And we became fast friends. And that's how our co-authoring arrangement was born, which is this idea of, hey, let's try to recapture some of what we had when we were active duty. And can we become a team as writers?
And so the question is, can you? So for me, and I've had other authors on, and I've actually had some publishers on as well. And for me personally, writing is a very private endeavor. I enjoy it. I don't do it as much as I used to and I blame my wife for that, because I'm happy now. Damn her. I did my best writing when I was sad and pissed off, or whatever the case may be. Might have been why I wrote so much in the military. I mean, it's, because let's be honest, the other thing that we're lacking when we get out of the military is that reason to complain. Military members are professional complainers about rank, about everybody above us, about the detail you're going to do. But no, seriously, like, it was a very private thing for me. A lot of times I didn't even want somebody to read my stuff. Like, I just wanted it to be there on a computer or in a notebook. Now you guys you're opening yourselves up for another person to be not only reading your stuff, but now intimately involved in the end product, and how that goes. So if you wouldn't mind, Jeff, you could start off. How did that feel in the beginning, especially, and how did you guys figure out what really worked for you? I mean, Tier 1 came out in 2016. So you were writing prior to that. Now 2016 comes around and you're going to do this. You're taking on this project.
Right. So it's definitely a change in mindset, and everything you say resonates with me so much because, I had written a number of books, Brian had written a number of books, and I had my system. And in my case, I've been writing since I was like 12 or 13 years old. I wrote short stories my whole life, and I had my way of writing. I've been doing it my whole life. And to be honest, it was Brian's idea that we maybe collaborate. He was like, you have this background where you've been working in the special warfare community. I got submarine. We could do this whole SEALs and subs, and it would be really, really cool. And I was sort of the one that was resistant to it. And it was just for the reasons that you said. It's like, it wasn't that I didn't like Brian. It wasn't like that I couldn't see how he could contribute and I could contribute. It was, I just didn't see how it logistically would work. Like I just didn't. And so when we finally decided to do it, it's the greatest decision we ever made, or certainly I ever made, was to do this, because look at our brand now. What we had to do is we had to sit down and be very intentional about it. It's interesting. We do a lot of writer conferences and stuff now. We've been on a few panels with other co-authoring teams. Mm-hmm. And they'll describe how they do it. And it's always very unique. Every team is unique in how they do it. But the way we do it, when we describe it, people are like, that's impossible. Well, okay, it's not. And the reason ours is unique, I think, is because of this military connection. When you're in the service, the complaining and the camaraderie and the grabbing drinks, that's all a real part of it. But at its core, there is this ethos of mission before self, of team before self. And so for people that have served for an extended period of time, especially in combat and in doing spooky, weird stuff that Brian will still not tell me about, over in the Pacific in his ISR boat, that's even magnified more. And so I think that we brought that to this partnership by nature of who we are. And that made that transition way easier than you might think it would be. Like I say, I was reluctant to do it, but once we started, it was so easy. It was so seamless, because we started by saying, what's our mission? What are we bringing to the table? How are we going to work as a team? And now we have this crazy system. I'll let Brian explain how it works. No one really ever believes this, but how the details of it work. The reason that this crazy system works is because it's mission and team before self. And there is no ego. There is no, he's going to see a side of me, or, he's not going to like what I write, or we don't care. In the end, it's about the mission. If the mission succeeds, because we both contributed, whether it was equal on a particular paragraph or chapter or project or not is irrelevant, as long as we brought our best to the table and completed the mission. And the mission in this case is an entertaining novel that people will enjoy. So
you basically set up like your own little core values to your writing team.
For sure.
It's broken. It's part of our DNA when you're in the military, that, from basic training on, your core values. It doesn't matter which branch of service you were in. So it sounds like basically you just took that and said, okay, that's going to be the basis for our writing team.
Oh, absolutely. And we defined the mission and we defined the roles, and, everything, we do a pre-mission brief, we do an after-action report. We don't call it that, but if we think back on what we do and how we do it, it's exactly
basically what you're doing. Right. Yeah. Right. So Brian, take us into a little bit, like almost into the writing room a little bit. So now you've come up with the idea to do the tier 1. I'm not positive. Did you guys come up with that idea together?
Yeah.
So that was together. So now you're going to sit down. How did you guys decide to tackle a fiction novel, a military thriller, as a team?
So now I get to geek out a little bit on some of the craft stuff. So as a writer, we talked a little bit before about that you've had a bunch of nonfiction guests on. You're into that. With fiction, there's different structures that you can use. And Jeff and I were already both writing in what's called the third person. Mm-hmm. That's he did this, she did this. And we write in multiple point of view, which means that you get inside the heads of multiple characters. It's not just one character every single chapter. Mm-hmm. So that structure is actually quite conducive to co-authoring, because it allows us to divide up the chapters based on character point of view. And so that's what we do. When we set out, we follow the 3-act structure, which is a very common and effective way to organize telling a story. It's something that's been used since Shakespeare,
Okay.
so people are very familiar with it. Even if they don't know what it is, when they see a play or a movie, they might not know as a consumer of that information that the story's being told to them in a 3-act structure, but we're all very familiar with it. So what we do is we start in our act 1, which is the inciting event or the thing that kicks off the story. Something happens, and now the hero has to respond. So we brainstorm out act 1, and we divide up the chapters by point of view. And this is the thing that Jeff was saying that some people have trouble wrapping their head around, is the fact that, wait, hold on, okay, so you're writing this chapter, he's writing that, you're writing simultaneously. How is the story, evolving if you guys are writing at the same time? And for us, the trick is that, number 1, we talk every day, when we're in the middle of a project, multiple times, so we know what the other guy is doing. And number 2, we switch our chapters back and forth. So the minute you finish a chapter, you send it to the other guy and he reads it. And then you talk about the next chapter. And the cool thing is we've given each other free rein to say, anything's on the table for editing or change. No idea is set in stone from the beginning. And that's very liberating to know that, okay, just because I wrote something, it doesn't have to go to press. If Jeff comes up, if I come up with an idea and Jeff comes up with a way to make it more thrilling or add more suspense or add more conflict or make it more creative, it's on the table for change.
Yeah. And I like that you said that even if you don't realize the structure of the entertainment that you're taking in, these ideas are older than time. Like you said, Shakespeare, all of that. I'm a huge Star Wars geek. I love it. And exactly what you're talking about, multi-character point of view and 3-act. That's the basis for Star Wars. Okay. You usually have about 3 to 4 characters that you're going to see their points of view. They're going to go off on their little adventures or missions or whatever the case may be. But you have that initial event. You have that development of the story in the middle. And then you have that closing at the end where we get to some kind of finale. Even if there's going to be another book or another movie, you still have that final, you still have that final battle or whatever the case may be. So when people say, well, I don't know how that stuff is done, everything you're taking in is using these basic principles. So you guys go through. Now you're editing as you go along?
Both. Yeah.
Okay.
So when he's talking about exchanging chapters, that's actually part of our editing process.
Okay.
One of the reasons that our books are written so quickly, well, first of all, because we have to now, because we have a lot of different series coming out, so we really have no choice. But because we're dynamic and very kinetic as we move forward, when he says, he sends me a chapter and I read it, and I send him a chapter and he reads it, he doesn't just read my chapter, he rewrites it.
Right.
And
right.
so we both have had a hand in every single chapter, which is what helps give it that single voice. And so a lot of the editing is happening as we go through, and that makes the developmental editing when the book is done a little bit easier, because we've talked so much. Even sometimes we'll even put a pin in something and say, you know what, when we get to developmental editing, we might want to tweak this because now we have this new thing that we wrote. So the editing is sort of going on constantly for us, which is one advantage of having the 2 authors. The disadvantage that people always ask us about is, what about conflict? What about when you disagree? And it sounds like something you make up for an interview, so you sound like you're this seamless corporation. We don't really have that. And the reason is because it's mission before self. It's not about credit. It's not about who wrote it. This sounds like a lie, but I'm telling you, my wife will be like, oh yeah, I read this chapter. And Wendy will be like, oh yeah, that you wrote that, didn't you? And I swear to you, I don't know. Did I write that, or did he write that? It's us. We write it together. So the only way that our method can work is if you're completely able to put ego aside. There can be no ego involved. Brian likes to use the analogy of parenting. when we were raising our 4 kids, it's not like I'm in charge of the boys and she's in charge of the girls, or I have the middle 2 and she has. We both parent our kids and hope that they turn into decent human beings.
Right.
And that's what Brian and I do here. We're like the parents. We're working together. Nobody cares about credit. What we care about is the product, and we want it to be, this is our baby, this next book, and we want it to be the best book it can be. And if Brian says, look, if we change this, it'll sell 2 more books, then let's change it. I'm fine with that. And we always have the out of, hey, if he feels strongly about it, even if I'm not sure I agree, I will say, look, let's give it a try. We can always go back and change it. And what's interesting is every time we've done that, where one of us has said, well, I'm not convinced, but let's try it, I can't think of a time we've gone back and changed it, because it generally, if someone feels that strongly, it just works out. So putting the ego aside is really, really the key to be able to do it that way.
And your characters have to benefit from that as well. Putting that ego aside and keeping the mission forward, it has to help with your character development, especially for fiction writers. Nonfiction, and for a lot of the authors that I've had on, they're telling their own life story. They're telling a memoir most of the time. They're remembering something. You're creating the memories of each individual character. You have to create the personality, the backstory. There's so much that goes into this. And that's why I think it's a credit to you guys. I mean, your process must work, because from 2016 to now, the Tier 1 series alone, you had 6 books and 1 novella. And these are not short stories, folks. These are thick fiction, military thriller novels. The novella is a little shorter. I think the novella is like 150 pages. It's something in there, I think. But these are, you're developing an entire world in these books. So you have to put your ego on the back burner, because you have to make a decision, not that's what's going to make you look good as an author, but what's going to work for the character, what's going to work for the storyline, what's going to make it so that you can transition into your next book, or in the case of Sons of Valor, into your entire universe, where now you're having an offshoot character who's now going to lead a team, and you have a new enemy that now you're going to kind of develop, and the whys. And, even with this, you have China involved, you have technology involved, you have a lot going on in the new book. When did you decide to branch out from the Tier 1 series? Was that always in the back of your head as you guys were writing?
No, we started with Tier 1 because that had a lot of momentum, and the character John Dempsey. So let me address 2 of the points you made. The first one is sort of the character. And I think it is a little weird, and even talking about it right now, it's kind of hard to wrap my head around the fact that, I'm getting in a character's head and writing John Dempsey, but so is Jeff. So how is it that we can know the same or write the same person, but we're doing it separately? And I think what's happened for me is it's almost like, you can imagine like this character has materialized in like real life. And it's not that I'm writing John Dempsey, it's that I know John Dempsey and Jeff knows John Dempsey. He's like almost like a real dude.
Yeah.
And so we sometimes talk about like, well, what would John do in this situation? And when we're writing him, he's almost doing these things himself. So that sounds a little weird, but that's kind of how it works for co-authors, is that these cast of characters, they're just people we know. They're almost like friends, Mm-hmm. And so when we started Tier 1 and we tried to build out this universe, that was our approach, is, what would this team look like, and how would these people act, and what would their conflicts be, and maybe where would they go? And so when you do it that way and you get to know these people, they sort of become friends. So when Chunk came into book 2 and made his cameo, we liked him.
Okay.
He was cool. So then we're like, we got to get Chunk back, because Dempsey liked him too. So we wanted him to come back. And so he came back, and the readers felt that fake but real relationship that these guys had, and that people said, we like Chunk, we'd like to know more about him. And so it wasn't that we ever envisioned writing Sons of Valor. It was that once we got to know Chunk, we were kind of like, well, what's he up to? It'd be sort of fun to tell his story.
Right.
So.
And
Now-
what made it very organic was the storyline. So for people that have read Tier 1, for people that haven't, we're not giving a huge spoiler here because it's very early in book 1. But the whole premise of the Tier 1 series is that the entire JSOC SEAL team gets wiped out in an ambush because of leaked intelligence. And the sole survivor, our hero John Dempsey, is presumed dead, but given this new identity as John Dempsey, and he is pulled into this very dark secret task force called Ember, where he's chartered to stand up a direct action team to hunt down and find those responsible. Right?
Okay.
So it was pretty organic as we got this, like Brian was saying, we were getting, there was a period of time, I think it was after book 4 maybe, where we were getting more fan mail about Chunk than about some of our main characters. And it wasn't that they didn't like the main characters. It was like, oh, you should do a novella about Chunk. And the next novella, we want to know more about Chunk. And we had a conversation where it was like, look, in real life, if this entire unit got wiped out, eventually they're going to stand that unit back up, of course.
Right.
And so it became very organic that like we were looking for a way to feature Chunk. It's like, whoa, if we spin off a series where we focus on reconstituting the JSOC SEAL team and all the difficulty that would go into that, wouldn't it be cool if we brought Chunk and his SEALs, a few of his select teammates, and they stood up the team? And so it just all sort of fell into place very organically that, the fans seemed to really like Chunk. We really liked Chunk. Dempsey liked him. And we needed this place for him to go. And it was just very natural to set him up. So that's how Sons of Valor was born, is now we have this new series where in Sons of Valor, we're going to focus just on this Tier 1 SEAL team and what kind of direct action they're doing, as opposed to the Ember universe, which is the super dark secret task force kind of stuff.
And you guys get really in depth with, like I said, the technology. There's drones, there's data analysts and stuff like that. I mean, one of the main characters is a ex-CIA data analyst, and you're getting into how all of this stuff kind of works in the background when we talk about how do we get our intelligence, how are we gathering information so that we can then, transition that into an action. So before these teams go into certain areas, there has to be intelligence that we use to decide what we're going to do. You both have very interesting pasts, but did you guys have to bring in anybody for advisors and stuff like that so that you get the details right? Because people that are going to read these books might know more than the average citizen that's walking around. You can't pull the wool over a lot of veterans'
Right.
eyes. So did you guys have to do that, or was your own background enough?
It's a mix of both, but you've sort of hit on something that I think is unique to our brand, in that, instead of having that single hero's journey, like is so common, and I'm not against that. I mean, those are great books. We both worked and had the honor of serving in some elite units where we understand how every single job on that nuclear submarine, every single job, including all the support jobs in a SEAL team, especially a JSOC SEAL team, are vitally important. And so we've tried very hard in Tier 1 and again here in Sons of Valor to show the diversity of team effort that's required for that point of the spear shooter to go through the door and do his job. And so we tried really, really hard to do that. Now, for both of us with the backgrounds we have, we were able to pull on a lot of experience and a lot of relationships that we still have in the community that we could ask people questions. So I would say it's a mix of both. Don't you think, Brian? We do use our own experience quite a bit, but we're certainly not afraid to reach out when we need to.
Yeah, I think that's a very good summary. And there's certain things, we were working on book 6 in Tier 1 series Collateral, and we wanted to have an Arleigh Burke. And so, Jeff and I both been on destroyers, but we never been skipper of a destroyer. So, when we were writing those scenes, I'm using a lot of the terms that we would use on a submarine for, the communication circuits and giving orders and rudder orders and talking to Jeff, do you think it's like this on a destroyer? He's like, I don't know, maybe we need to reach out. So we reached out to, a friend of mine who's a '06 at the Pentagon and said, hey, do you know anybody who's been a skipper of Arleigh Burke? He's like, yeah. So he connected Jeff and I with a guy who'd been a skipper of an Arleigh Burke, and we sent him pages and had some conference calls with him, and it was really fun, because he was like, yeah, that's not how we say it. We do this or we do that. And he told some anecdotes, and we worked those into the story, and a great example of that, collaboration was, he said, you've got the boat flanking everywhere. And he's like, when you're a Arleigh Burke skipper, you're always thinking about fuel. And I thought, oh yeah, that's a paradigm I never had to worry about Louisville, because we had a 25,000 effective full power hour nuclear powered gas tank. Like we didn't have to worry about fuel. The gas tank would outlive my tour and the next 3 tours after me, so, but strategically for an Arleigh Burke skipper, that's a big deal. If you're in the Black Sea, you can't do an unwrap. Where are you going to get gas? So you can't be ignoring that. So that adds another level of authenticity, that reaching out, that adds authenticity to the story. So yeah, and I think the last comment on that, I think we're both fairly self-aware and we try to be humble. Like Jeff said, it's part of our method. So if we don't know, we're happy to ask, because it's not about our ego. It's not about proving we know the most about blah, blah, blah. It would only damage our brand if we got something wrong. So yeah, we're happy to reach out and involve others in the process.
And a military audience, if you have a majority military or veteran audience, they're brutal. They're brutal. I remember, we were a bunch of mechanics in the Air Force, and we'd sit around on Sunday and have Sunday dinner over in Italy, and we'd throw on a movie, and like girlfriends would come over, and some of our friends that weren't mechanics, maybe they were in finance, maybe they were firefighters, maybe they were security forces, whatever, and they'd come over and they'd be like, oh, please don't put on Fast and Furious, because we would just rip the movies apart. Like, what did that guy just say? No, he did not. Like, and we would kill it. So it's the same thing with this. Like, if you don't reach out to that skipper and you're using sub terminology for a different type of craft, they're going to kill you. So you have to check your ego and say, no, you know what? I got to get that information and I got to get this right, or it's not going to make any sense.
And more fun for us too. Like we're making new relationships and learning new stuff. Brian and I both, he was very humble in his bio. He didn't really tell you the whole story about his giant brain. We'll get into that another day. But his ability to absorb information as a person with a bachelor's degree in psychology that somehow ended up in the nuclear engineering force is just astronomical. And so, but we're both very curious and we like to learn new stuff. So in that book in particular, book 6, Collateral, where it was the first time we did, big footprint military operations. We always just did our covert guys behind the scenes. We had a little bit of stuff and we had some drone technology, but to have Marines moving in, we have a MEU staging in the Ukraine and their delivery system. We have Air Force jets, we have Marine Corps fighters and all this stuff. It afforded us not just the opportunity to grow and share more of that universe, but boy, did we learn. I learned more writing that book, I think, than anything else we've written.
Yeah, that's cool. And that has to be fun in the whole process. Like you said, doing it as a team, knowing that your mission is to get the book out and you're doing this, but you're learning as you kind of go along. So you almost have like a little bit of a nonfiction book in your own head going on in the background. And then you have to write.
Very interesting times right now. And one of the things that, geopolitics is very kinetic. And the other thing that's quite interesting right now is I think that you see Russia and China, they telegraph now, sort of wargaming out in these statements. Okay, we're going to say this and we're going to see what people do. And I think, Crimea was a perfect example of that. Putin didn't know what would happen when he invaded Crimea. He wanted it back. He wanted that move allowed him to take control of the Black Sea. You know, Russia once basically had control of the Black Sea, and when they lost Sevastopol to Ukraine, I mean, it was strategically and tactically a giant blow.
Yeah.
So, you know, they try these little things here and there with their little green men. Kremlin puts out statements and they see how people respond. And it's still going on today. So Jeff and I pay very close attention to that. And so like that was what we did with Collateral. We said, okay, you know, what if, you know, we see some telegraphing in the Donbass and Eastern Ukraine, what would he do if he wanted to make a move and a bigger land grab? And so we started looking at position papers on that. And Brookings Institute, for example, had a great one about, okay, you know, what's going on with the separatists and ABC, what could happen? All this information is out there. And we just asked the question, okay, what if this happened? How would it unfold? And what would our response be? And that's sort of the basis of our books. And it's so nice that, you know, we can tell you're interviewing us, it's obvious you read Sons of Valor. And so that allows us to say, you saw that what if question, you know,
Yes.
What if, you know, our enemy in the Middle East tried to shift the balance of power? We've had a very asymmetric advantage there in that theater for 20 years. What happens if they try to change that?
And I like that you kind of pull in information. I think when we talk about Russia specifically, but also China, they're looking at a long game, I think, in a lot of different things and a lot of plays that they do in geopolitics and things like that. And a lot of it, I think, is information centric, where they're trying to play with information to see where it's going to go. Like you said, test the waters. So I think they did it with the elections. I think they did it with COVID. I don't really think that people realized that there were so many bots giving out information. Everybody thought it was a Trump versus the Democrats, the Republicans versus. Russia was very heavy-handed in misinformation campaigns all over the world with COVID. Like I said, the elections. I see Russia also looking at Afghanistan as gentleman that I just spoke to recently, I was talking about the lithium reserves in Afghanistan. I think Russia and China are both going to want their hands on that. You know, and as we pull out, there's that, hey, are they just going to try to move in and kind of just grab it? Because if there is this chaotic scene when we leave, it'll be very easy for Russia or China just to seize the opportunity and be back in there. And at least in a business standpoint, they don't even have to go in from a military perspective. They can go in with their business arms, which are run by the government, and tackle these different, you know, natural resources and actually get the money out of it and position themselves to have power over the United States, even if they can't do it in a military fashion. So it's very interesting how you pull all these different things into a fiction novel, which is what you have to do to make it realistic. It's very cool stuff. Very cool stuff. I get into the geopolitics.
Definitely a lot of fun to do. And Brian and I are both voracious consumers of geopolitical fact, not fiction. You know, we both, he mentioned Brookings Institute, which is a tremendous resource to us. There's a number of those out there. We follow these things very, very closely, and we try to work them in. It's the difference between having it as a subtext in your novel, though, when you're writing the kind of stuff we do, versus, you know, something that's the overt plot. It's for us, because we're writing things that are, you know, especially in the Tier 1 series, we've got this whole very super secret, dark element, small unit tactics. Other than Collateral, we weren't able to work in the enormous overriding geopolitics as the driving force of a book, but it's always a subtext. In fact, as you guys were talking, I was thinking, we just wrote, Brian, like a few weeks ago, we're writing in another series called The Shepherds. We wrote a little piece where they are talking about the power vacuum in Northwest Iraq and Eastern Syria, and how when you see these operations going on and you assume it's these jihadists, it may not be. There's a lot of puppet masters in that region. There's a lot of people who are very, very interested in who's going to control both the politics and the geography of those regions, and Afghanistan with its resources you mentioned. And so working that, even if it's just working it in as a subtext of a broader plot, just makes it resonate with the readers, especially the informed readers. But it also makes it way more fun for us because we're just geeks about that stuff.
Right, right.
And then you have a book like Collateral, where we wrote Collateral and the book comes out, and 8 months after the book comes out, literally what we wrote is evolving in Eastern Ukraine. And in fact, the response of our Navy into the Black Sea is literally exactly what we wrote. And we're not that smart. I mean, there's a lot of luck that goes into something
right.
like that. But it's just really satisfying. You know, you got it right when you see things come out of the headlines after you've written it instead of before. But it makes it a lot more fun as a writer, for sure.
And it's got to be a little scary too when you write some of this stuff and then you're like, man, I just thought of that. That could actually happen. Wait, yeah, whoa.
Or even worse, when your ego gets a little bigger and you're like, oh shit, did we cause that? Did we give them that idea?
Yeah. Is Putin sitting with a book in front of him going, that's a pretty good idea.
Yeah, Eastern Ukraine. Yeah. That's a very good idea, Brian. Thank you so much.
We don't want to see the picture of him with a book, one of your books, no shirt, maybe a lion or tiger in the background, that we don't need that. So, but, so about how long does each one of these books take? We were talking about that you churn them out pretty quick. What is your usual go-to as far as how long one of these books takes to write?
Well, the process is a little bit constrained by the industry, and there's certain steps, I think, for people that aren't writers and haven't ever been published before. You have to understand that there's a established publication cycle for a traditional publisher. Now, if you're writing self-published, which is KDP, you're on your own, that you can throw all out the window. But they have a whole series of books that they have to plan, and when you turn in a rough draft, it's going to be read, and then you're going to get assigned a developmental editor who's going to help you with the plot, and then it's going to go to copy editing and proofreading, and then after that they typeset it, and you have your cover art, and then you have all the promotional copy and a marketing campaign that needs to be spooled up. So, you really can't, 1 year is the absolute fastest that they could churn out a book. But I would say, 18 months is sort of the typical planning cycle for a novel. So, we are writing books like Jeff alluded to, we started with tier 1, and then we started shopping some other ideas, and lo and behold, like they all sold, which we didn't really expect. We were sort of hedging our bets, and then they all sold, and we're saying, can we do this? So we're writing tier 1, we're writing Sons of Valor, we have this Shepherd series, and then we're also writing the Webb Griffin. Webb Griffin passed away last year, and we were honored enough to be chosen to continue the Presidential Agent series. So we're working on that. So now we've got these 4 series, and we always have a book somewhere in production. So, we try to get the rough draft done in 3 months and then turn that in. And then another book's getting kicked back to us for DE, and another book's getting kicked back for copy edits. So there's no rest for the weary, and it's all self-inflicted punishment, but it never stops for us right now. There's always a book in some phase of the publication cycle.
And do you try to keep like a single book in a single phase? So like if you're actually writing one book, or are you writing multiple books at the same time, or do you kind of try to stagger it a little bit if it's possible, so that you have one in the edit process, one in the writing process, wherever you're at?
We've been able to, first of all, a huge shout out to our amazing editors. At Tom Colgan at Putnam at Penguin, Karen Watson at Tyndale House, Rick Blayweiss and his team at Blackstone. They have been so gracious in working together, which was something we didn't expect, and accommodating our weird schedule. So it's yes and no is really the answer to your question. In terms of the first draft of any book, we're only working on the first draft of any book one at a time right now. And if God is listening, that will continue forever, because I'm not sure that adding that layer would be good for our mental health.
You would really need his psychology degree at that point.
So
that would come in instantly.
So that forces us to write a book about every 3 months because of the demands of the schedule of writing 4 series, and there might even be another announcement next year about something else, but we'll talk about that next year. But so in order to produce all of this, we kind of have, unless we want to have it overlap, we got to crank out a book no less than 3.5 months, 4 at the absolute outside.
Wow.
But the overlap then becomes the developmental editing and the line and copy editing. So in an ideal world, Brian and I are writing, he explained our method. We're writing simultaneously. We're transferring chapters back and forth, rewriting them, sticking them in a master file. The water that gets in that oil is when you're in the middle of a book, sort of like what's happening to us right now. And one of the editors comes back and says, okay, here's the developmental edits on this other book, and we need it in, 8 weeks. Well, now we have to sort of take turns going in and out of writing the first draft of this book because we got DE to do in the other book. But because there's 2 of us, we're able to manage that as well. So what we've been doing with that is, Brian will be his turn to take a bullet for the team. Like, okay, I'll go the first pass. I'll spend the next few weeks doing DE on this book. You keep moving the needle. And my productivity goes way down when that happens. And I think vice versa, not just because we're not writing together, so I'm not getting his page count. My page count goes down just because there's a synergy when we work together. It's motivating. I read his stuff and it gives me an idea.
Right.
So instead of writing 5 or 6 pages a day, 7, 8 on a really good day, suddenly I'm doing 3 or 4, and that's all I can come up with because I don't have that synergy. So it hurts us. And actually right now, this is probably the worst it's ever been. We're getting it all done, but we have a book that we're finishing up. We're about a third of the way done with a new book. And we have a book that's in the final stages of developmental editing. And we have another book from another editor who is in the early stages of developmental editing. And that's sort of all overlapped at once. That's the perfect storm. It's the first time it's happened. We really hope it never happens again because it's horrible. But that's what it is, still a job, right? It can't just be all fun or else.
Right.
Yeah.
There has to be, there is some struggle that goes through, but something you said kind of resonated in my head there for a second is your page count went down when you were writing by yourself. And there's been so many times when I've been working on something and I'll be sitting in front of the computer and I just start staring at it. And, it's writer's block. I mean, everybody's gone through it. I wonder if you guys actually deal with that in a different way because you have somebody to kind of kickstart you, like you said, with a new idea. I start reading. All right, I'm in a little bit of a block. Let me read what he had. Oh, wait. Oh, yeah. Okay, now I can kick in and you go into kind of overdrive and now you can work through it. Whereas if I'm doing it by myself, my brain has to kickstart me. I don't have anything else. Maybe I could watch a movie or step away and go outside and, I look at something and it kind of jogs a memory or something. But you guys have a unique situation because, Brian, if you're stuck on something, Jeff gives you a page and now all of a sudden you're like, I know where I had to go. I'm going into it now.
Yeah, that's the coolest part of our partnership.
Yeah.
We always brag about the fact that we don't have writer's block because our solution is we just pick up the phone. Right. I mean, just yesterday, I'd finished a chapter and I was thinking, okay, well, it could go 1 or 2 or 3 different ways. I'm not sure which way to go now with the next chapter. So I just called up Jeff and said, here's what, I hadn't even had a chance to send it to him. I said, here's what I wrote. Here's where we are. We can sort of focus, go this direction. I don't know what the characters would do in this case. And he's like, okay, well, I think that they'd probably do this and this would happen. And I said, oh, okay, I like that. I hadn't thought of that one. And then we'll say, well, what if they do that? Now what? And so it really does, it's one guy thinks of something, gives an idea, then the next guy tacks on. And suddenly now, I'm hang up the phone and I'm writing again. It's like, if you have to pack on a trip to go on vacation with your family, and you're trying to do it and your wife's not involved, how many things are you going to leave home?
In my case, all of them.
I know personally, I'd forget like all the most important things.
Yes.
And we'd end up at the destination. My wife would be like, how could you have forgotten X, Y, and Z? Like, it's so obvious. And I'd say, well, I don't know. It's a very good point you make. So we're sort of like that, like we come up with 60% sort of it on our own. And then we call the other guy and he fills it in. and then we're off to the races. And so it's very powerful for us, and it keeps the momentum.
I'm the unintelligent guy that goes back to his wife and says, well, you let me pack. So this is really on you.
Right.
This is your
and she
decision
says,
making.
and it didn't occur to you that your daughter would need pants.
Right. Yes. Yeah. That's very true. So you guys have created, again, like you have the tier 1 universe. Now you've got the offshoot here with Chunk being the new, not new character, but now the new lead character. And then now you have a whole new series over here. Do you find that working in the fiction space in the military is a place that you can keep expanding like this, or do you find that there's a little bit more of a call to head to the nonfiction, especially in this day and age where we have been in 20 years of war and there's so much nonfiction coming out in the military space? This was very popular through the 80s and 90s, your military thriller. Do you find that this is still very popular?
Yeah, I think there's been a resurgence in the popularity, and I think it's due to several things. One, there isn't anybody left in America that isn't at least more than 1 degree separation from someone who's been there. And so that makes it, it's in the news for a generation now, and people just have a curiosity about it. Number 2, I think that you're seeing an explosion of talented writers because of that experience. And we had talked earlier about offline before we got started on the interview about this enormous population of military veterans writing in this space right now and bringing that life experience to the page in a way that makes the 80s thriller completely different to the thrillers that we write today. Those guys were incredible writers. They're the people I grew up reading, Tom Clancy, Robert Ludlum, these amazing writers, but none of them had been out there on the pointy tip of the spear. And so they were writing from a different perspective. Now you have Josh Hood writing the Treadstone series. You have Don Bentley, who's now going to be writing the Jack Ryan series, the Jack Ryan Jr. series, in addition to his other works. You have, oh my gosh, the list goes on and on. A.J. Tata is writing in this space. We've got Jack Carr writing in the space. There's just an enormous number of people. And so you've seen an evolution of the genre where the books that you read now and that we call military thrillers are nothing. I'm not saying they're better or worse, but they're very different in the way they present things. And I think that as a result, you see things becoming more character driven, which is most people's favorite way to read, even though they may not know that. As a reader, you don't identify that that's what resonated with you, but it is, by and large, that those characters came to life for you. And for people that have been there and done that for a lot of these topics, that's way easier to generate a character that's believable and gritty and, reminds you of somebody. So I think that, you hear rumors about the saturation in the military thriller market and that kind of stuff. I don't buy it. I think that people are going to continue to read it as long as guys like us continue to do a good job. Like if it starts getting redundant and it's retread stories, then that's different. But there's so much in geopolitics, like we talked about earlier, that it is basically a limitless well of fresh, new, unique ideas. So as long as you as a writer commit yourself to searching for those and not just retreading the same old stuff, I think that the genre's got a very, very bright, very long future.
And I almost think that you guys have created it's almost a new genre because it's fiction with nonfiction embedded inside of it for that military thriller because of exactly what you're talking about, that new generation of writer who is actually there. So now they're drawing on personal experiences or experiences of friends, like you said, when you tap, a guy at the Pentagon on the shoulder and say, hey, I didn't do this. Do you have somebody I could talk to? Now you're putting real information into these books, even though the storyline and the plot is a work of fiction. There's so much realism to it that it's borderline this new kind of hybrid genre of the two, which is probably why it's so popular, because people can see through the bullshit. They want honesty in what they're reading, and they can tell if they can almost say that's just ridiculous. I don't even want to read that. Whereas with your guys' stuff, you can almost feel like you're embedded in with these units as you're reading about it, and you can see that there's realism and actual people have gone through these types of situations.
Yeah, and I think Jeff hit on something very important, which is when you think about whose story is this? When you talk about character, if you're an author who's never served at the pointy tip of the spear, but you're trying to imagine what it's like from your civilian perspective, you can only get so close because your paradigm is based on your life experience. But now these characters that we're writing about, they're actively thinking about, where do I fit in this big machine? And is the world black and white, or is it shades of gray? And, these, they're not just robots out there doing a job. They're people with a moral compass and their own set of principles. And so these characters question what they're doing. Sometimes they question, what is leadership doing? I'm out here executing this mission. Am I just a blunt instrument, or am I, something more than that? And so we try to get into that, and everybody has different personal motivations. And in Sons of Valor, Chunk is a very different character than John Dempsey. And
right.
Worried early on, okay, can we tell a story about a character who doesn't have all these skeletons in the closet? He's not driven by angst. He's not driven by revenge. His family wasn't wiped out. He's a dude who loves being a SEAL, and he brings a lot of positive energy to his job. And that's what it takes to succeed in real life. But in dramatic storytelling and fiction, people really want to latch on to this hero who has anger and angst, and I want to figure out what drives him.
It's the Batman thing. It's that's what it is. It's the Batman thing.
And we struggled with that because Chunk is not Batman.
Right. So it's a different type of character. And, coming from writing 6 books of the Tier 1, where it kind of was that, it was the Batman type idea. Now you're doing something very different in this book, which, hey, listen, good on you guys, keeping it fresh, and you're giving somebody a different idea, but they can still stay in that genre, that military thriller, but they can explore a newer idea and a newer type of leader, a new type of alpha character.
Yeah, well, I think expanding on that in a broader sense is this, and we did have a very long conversation about, can we make a hero whose hero's journey is just, man, I love being a SEAL. Like, is that gonna work? And we think we did it. We think we made it work here, and certainly the feedback has been very positive. But I think in a broader sense, it's a different way of approaching fiction that you even think about that. Because to do that means that you're writing characters who are very, very multidimensional. And, the old model of military action thrillers were these superheroes, the Man of Steel, who are, charging up the hill and, bullets whizzing past them. And, they always succeed. They always win. They can't be killed. Well, we write these characters with doubts, like Brian was alluding to. They have doubts, they have questions. They are a much more modern version of a warrior. And by writing it that way, we then expand into relationships, because the characters become diverse. And so therefore their relationships are different. The relationship of Dempsey with Grimes and Dempsey with Munn, or Munn with Grimes, they're all very, very, very different and dynamic. And so that makes it really, really fun. And so the hero's journey is something that needs to be sort of redefined in that context. If you're going to write characters who are already not a classic Superman hero kind of character, well, then it gives you a little bit of a broader ability to grab a chunk and say, what would his journey be like? What motivates him? Well, in this case, it's the Brotherhood. It's his brother SEALs. He's not married. He doesn't have kids. He's not worried about that. But man, he's sure worried about his teammates and their families. And that's a good leader, isn't it? So it gave us an opportunity to look at some different aspects of that hero model.
Yeah, it's very cool. And all of this this knowledge that you guys have built up through all of these different books and stuff, you're even working on passing a little bit of that along. Brian, I know you work with, what is it? It's career authors which is a website that authors can kind of get information, whether they're published or not published, correct?
That's right. Jeff and I met at the International Thriller Writers Conference, and it's a conference that's all these thriller writers that come together. They launched a debut author program where they try to help mentor authors and bring them into the industry, teach them, share lessons learned on marketing, on craft, on getting an agent and being published. And so we feel like part of our responsibility, because we had John Land, for example, as a fantastic human being who sort of took us under his wings. He introduced us to people. He gave us blurbs. He wrote reviews. He helped bring us into this community, and he asked for nothing in return. And that resonates with us. So Career Authors is one way for me to try to give back, share some of the knowledge and the experience that I've learned, put it out there for free. It's available for anybody, and it's a platform that, I'm very proud to be a member of. And so Jeff and I do that. And the same thing goes, Jeff, he doesn't talk about this, but he's mentoring 5 or 6 authors at any given time. And he's doing it on his own time. He doesn't brag about it. He's very humble about it, but he's taking people's calls. He's doing Zooms. He's looking at pages. He's giving people advice. And it's just, we feel like that's just part of our ethos.
Yeah. It's that, again, that mission, you guys talked about it from the beginning of the show all the way to the end of the show. It's the cornerstone of what you guys are doing. It's awesome. I love it. I love that you're giving back, and I love that you're helping the next generation of authors as they're coming up, or just, it could be just somebody who's struggling to kind of break through and they don't know what they're doing wrong. They're trying to get published. They don't know what route to go. So many people get discouraged at a very early on time. And if they just had somebody that gave them a little bit of information, they could break through, and who knows what they could do. So I think that's great that you're both doing that. That's very important. Very, very important. I've kept you guys for about an hour, which is awesome. I love talking to you. This has been a lot of fun. And I love hearing about, just the character development to me is the coolest part. I mean, how Dempsey didn't end up with multiple personality disorder, I'm still trying to figure out. But I think your psychology background probably steered it away from there, so that's good. But where can people get the book? I know it's coming out. It'll be out end of next week. No, the following week after that, I believe. June 8th, I believe.
June 8th, yeah. So basically, you can get this book anywhere you buy your books. It's available widely anywhere. You can pre-order it, Barnes & Noble, your indie bookstore, Amazon, or after June 8th, you can get it anywhere. Anybody can go to our website, andrews-wilson.com. We have so much going on right now that it's hard to get it all out there, but that's a nice place. You can sign up for our newsletter, and you'll know what the next book coming out is. We also just set up a fan page, which is really fun because now people are sending in pictures of themselves and what their journey is. So we'd invite you to become part of the community that we've got going there. And then I'm going to make one little plug. I hope it's okay with you.
Please.
We've been talking about giving back, and we've partnered with a group or a team of guys, David and Tim. These two guys, Tim Cruikshank is a SEAL, a Navy SEAL, who is now retired, working as a PA, and he has started a coffee company called Bone Frog Coffee. Yep,
yes, sir.
You got yours, I'll get mine. So this is fun, and this is not an ego thing. There's a point here, I promise. But if you look closely, you'll see that this is the Sons of Valor blend.
Awesome.
So Bone Frog Coffee partnered with us to create this brand to do two things. One, we want to raise awareness of their brand because we are really proud of the work that they're doing. This is a very service-oriented gentleman, both of these guys, and they give back to the Naval Special Warfare community. They have 5 specific charities that they support. A portion of every single sale of every brand of coffee that they sell and all their merch goes to those communities. But what we wanted to do with this was raise that awareness through our brand, and 100% of the revenue generated from our involvement here goes to support those charities as well. So if you feel the debt of gratitude that we do for not just the men and women who have been out on the pointy tip serving and sacrificing, but for us, our heart is about the families. Our heart is about the kids, the wives that are sometimes left behind when last full measure of devotion is exercised. We have just such a heart for that community. And so if you want to go to Bonefrog, one word, bonefrog-coffee.com, or you can find it on our website as well. You can find this coffee. It is the best coffee I've ever had in my life. I'm not kidding. So that makes it easy. But when you buy this coffee, you are supporting charities that give back to the women and men who are left behind sometimes, to the children who are left without a dad sometimes. And we would love it if you could just get involved in any way possible. So just wanted to make that last pitch.
And Tim actually will be coming on the show. He's he's a great guy. We're going to be talking coffee. We're going to be talking wine. We're going to be talking about all these charities as well. So it's a great segue actually, because he is going to be coming on the show. I'm very excited to sit down and talk with him. We spoke on the phone recently, and he's just a very interesting guy. I'm looking forward to it. He is,
isn't he? He's an amazing human being. David as well, his business partner. These two guys are just amazing people. And they have, being a SEAL, he doesn't do anything half-assed, right? So if he's going to make coffee, he's going to make the absolute best coffee you've ever tasted in your life. And he did that. Same thing with their wine.
Yes.
They hired this winemaker, this vintner, and out where they are. And I'm a wine snob, I'll just tell you.
Okay.
And I don't drink Merlot generally because I feel like Merlot is for people who don't like wine. But they have blended the best Merlot I have ever tasted in my life. It is fantastic.
He was talking about the Merlot to me because it's the Sideways thing. Everybody watched the movie Sideways, and they're screaming about the Merlot, and now nobody wants to drink Merlot. It's all right.
Right. Well, you'll want to drink his. So I'm so glad you guys connected. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Great. You're gonna have a really fun time talking to him.
Yeah. No, like I said, I'm really looking forward to it. So, but that's great. I'm glad that you guys are getting involved with the community outside of just the literature, but people want to connect nowadays. We want to have this network where we're kind of all feeding into each other and we're helping out the people that need the help. So that's great that you're doing that. Thank you.
Oh, it's our pleasure. We feel passionate about it. The last pitch will be to go to seallegacy.com. That's one of the charities supported by Bone Frog. It's also the charity that Brian and I have personally supported for the last several years. They have amazing programs. I won't waste your time going into the details of it. But if you go to seallegacy.com, you'll find all their programs. Incredible organization. And we'd ask, if you can support them, please do.
Definitely. And I'll tell you one thing I can tell you about the listeners that we have on this show. They are very generous with their dollars, especially if they know it's going to a good cause. I mean, I'm trying to get a 5K going right now, and all of our money is going to One More Wave, which is an organization out in California. Two more Navy SEALs that started that one. And I'm blown away by the dollars that people have put into these different things. Guys that don't even run, guys and girls, they don't even run, but they're like, you know what, I'll throw $40 at it, $50 at it, and let's go for a run. So it's great to see. It's an awesome community. It really is. Amen. But thank you guys so much for coming on the show. I've had a blast talking to you. Brian, do you have anything before we go? Any last tidbits, anything that you want to get out?
I don't think so, other than just the fact that we talked about what it's like when you're a veteran and you feel like you're left flapping in the wind. And this partnership with Bone Frog and Navy SEAL Foundation and all these other veteran authors, that was our solution, which is that we decided to, hey, let's find what we had in active duty in the veteran community. And, this is not a novel idea, but it's sometimes everybody has to come to the same we all have to learn the same lesson, right? Yep. So what we're trying to put out there is that, there are so many veterans out there who are willing to, reach out a hand and help lift you up or bring you into the fold. So this idea of co-promotion and talking about each other's businesses, this is the way we all succeed. It's by all getting together and getting that boat rowing in the same direction. And that does give us strength in numbers. So, if you are a veteran, you're listening and you want to start a business, don't be afraid to reach out to authors or other people in other spaces. Look these businesses up online, shoot them an email, and I promise they will be happy to help connect you with people they know, or at least at the minimum, give you some tips and lessons learned from their experience.
Yeah. And like you said, use that network. it's very easy to spark a conversation with somebody as soon as you start talking about your military service. So even if that just gets you in the door to get some information and get pointed in the right direction, it definitely helps and it works. So that's great advice. Jeff, Brian, thank you so much. Sons of Valor out June 8th. Pre-order now, Amazon, wherever you're getting your books. Please check this out. And if you haven't already, get into that Tier 1 series. Start enjoying that. There's 6 books, 1 novella, and you can read all about Dempsey and everything, and then you'll get right into this after that. So, guys, again, thank you so much for Bulletproof Veteran Podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.